There are days when we wake up with a tightness in our chest, as if our body knows before our mind that something bad is going to happen. I should have paid attention to this warning when I woke up that day, but how could I imagine that my life would turn upside down in a matter of hours? Good morning, dear listeners. My name is Louise Miller, and today at 73 years old, I've decided to share a story I've kept buried for so long that it was suffocating me from within. I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania, in a simple wooden house my father built with his own hands. It was 1952, a time when we still believed the future could only be better than the present. I grew up watching my mother wake before sunrise to make breakfast for the family. My father left for the furniture factory, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, but always with a smile on his face when he came home. That's how I learned what family meant. People who care for each other, who protect one another, who would give their lives for each other without thinking twice. At least that's what I believed with all my heart. I met my Frank when I was 17 at a church fundraiser. He approached me shyly, hair neatly combed with Brill cream, freshly ironed shirt, offering me a cup of apple cider that he almost spilled because his hand was trembling so much. He had brown eyes that seemed to ask permission to exist, a slightly crooked smile that melted me inside, and a way of speaking softly that made me lean in closer to hear. It was love at first sight, the kind you feel in your stomach before you even understand it in your head. We dated for 2 years, always respectfully. He would come to my house on Sundays, have lunch with my family, and play cards with my father. Frank worked at a steel mill, didn't earn much, but saved every penny thinking about our future. We married in 1971 in a simple ceremony with cake made by my mother and music played by his friends. Our first little house was rented, just 2 small rooms. But to us, it seemed like a palace. The walls were thin. You could hear the neighbors sneeze, but we didn't mind. Frank would leave for work before dawn and return at dusk, always bringing something small. A flower picked along the way, a piece of candy someone had given him at the factory, little tokens of love that were worth more than any riches. In 1972, our Mary was born, a beautiful girl with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. Frank cried when he held her in his arms for the first time, swore he would give her everything he never had. He worked twice as hard now, taking overtime whenever possible. Sometimes he came home so tired he could barely eat before falling into bed. But he never complained. He said each drop of sweat was an investment in our daughter's future. The steel mill where he worked wasn't very safe. Occasionally, a colleague would have an accident, lose a finger, burn an arm. Frank himself had several scars on his hands from minor accidents. When I complained, worried, he would just say, "Woman, a man's work is just like that. What matters is bringing bread to the table." Folks, I'm getting emotional remembering these moments. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a like down below and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. This grandma is curious to know who's listening with care on the other side of the screen. And don't forget to subscribe to Grandparents' Tales to catch the next stories. In 1980, 8 years after Mary came Junior. It was a surprise. I was already 28. I thought I wouldn't have any more children. The pregnancy was difficult. I spent almost all 9 months in bed. Frank did everything. Took care of Mary, the house, worked, and still looked after me. He was quite a man, my Frank, the kind they don't make anymore these days. When the boy was born, Mary was already 8 years old and was like having a little helper. She adored her baby brother, always wanting to feed him, change his diapers, and play with him. We were a beautiful family, you know. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Frank had gotten a promotion at the factory and was now a supervisor. He earned a bit better. We could even buy a small black and white television. Our life had a peaceful routine. In the morning, I'd wake up early, prepare coffee for Frank, and get Mary ready for school. Junior stayed home with me while I did laundry, cleaned the house, and prepared lunch. In the afternoon, I'd pick Mary up from school. And at night, we'd wait for Frank to come home from work. We'd have dinner together, him always asking how everyone's day went. On Sundays, we'd go to church in the morning and then have lunch at my mother's or his mother's house, alternating. It was a simple life, but it was ours. I was happy, but you know how it is, right? We never value what we have until we lose it. Some days I'd complain about the small house, the tight budget, the never-ending work. Some days I'd argue with Frank over silly things, him coming home late because of overtime. I'm tired of taking care of everything alone. If I could go back in time, I swear I wouldn't waste a minute on such nonsense. I'd cherish every second with him, store each smile in my memory like a treasure. Mary grew up fast, became a beautiful young woman, studious like her father. She managed to get into college with a partial scholarship. She was the first in the family to go so far. The pride we felt couldn't fit in our chests. Frank insisted on buying her a new dress, even if it meant working overtime for a whole month to pay for it. My daughter won't enter college wearing old clothes, he'd say, chest puffed with pride. She left home at 19 to live closer to college with some friends. It was too far to commute every day, and the bus fare weighed on our budget. It hurt to see her go, even knowing it was for the best. The house felt emptier, quieter. I think that's when Junior started to change. He was always a quiet boy, different from his sister. While Mary was talkative, full of friends, Junior preferred to stay in his corner reading or drawing. He didn't do well in school. Teachers always complained that he didn't pay attention. Frank was tougher on him, demanding more. Maybe because he expected his son to follow in his footsteps. Maybe because he saw in the boy the chance to fulfill dreams he himself had to abandon. "This boy needs a firm hand, Louise," Frank would say. "A man who doesn't study becomes a beast of burden like me." I tried to soften things, saying everyone has their own pace, that Junior was sensitive, needed patience. Sometimes this turned into arguments between us, but never anything serious. At the end of the day, we always slept embracing each other, problems forgotten until the next morning. When Junior turned 13, Frank got a better job at a larger factory. The salary was almost double, but the conditions weren't as good. He worked with heavier, more dangerous machines. He'd come home exhausted, often with pains in his back and arms. I'd apply ointment, make compresses, try to relieve him as best I could. "I can't stand to see you like this, Frank," I'd say. "This job is wearing you down. And how are we going to pay for Mary's college and save for Junior's future?" He'd reply, "A man who's a man doesn't choose his work, Louise. He does what needs to be done." That's how my Frank was. He put family above everything, even if it meant sacrificing his own health. A man from another time, you know, one of those who believed that their role in the world was to provide, protect, support their own, no matter the cost. Our life followed its quiet course. We'd managed to save a little money and bought a small house in installments. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Frank would spend weekends making small repairs, painting walls, fixing up the yard. I took care of the inside, made new curtains, colorful cushions. We tried to transform those simple walls into a real home. Junior continued to be withdrawn, increasingly closed off. At school, his grades were mediocre, neither bad enough for us to despair, nor good enough for us to be proud. He had few friends, and the ones he had didn't please me much. Older boys with faces that looked like they already knew the world too well for their age. But what could I do? Teenagers are like that. You can't force it. Frank tried to get closer to him, take him fishing, teach him how to fix things, and spend time together. Sometimes it worked. They'd come back talking, laughing. Other times the boy would sulk, respond rudely, leave his father talking to himself. In those moments, Frank would have that sad look of someone who doesn't understand where he went wrong. "Give it time," I'd say. "It's just a phase. It'll pass." Mary would visit us on weekends when she could. She'd bring stories from college about professors, new classmates. The house would light up when she was there. Even Junior seemed more animated. Frank would look at her with so much pride that it was a joy to see. "This one will go far," he'd comment to me later when we were alone. "She has her mother's intelligence." I'd laugh, saying she had her father's determination. It was true. Mary had inherited the best of both of us. His grit, my sensitivity. She was a strong, determined young woman, but with a soft heart for what mattered. In 1995, Frank turned 45. We had a small party at home, and invited some friends, family. He seemed happy that day, but I noticed he was more tired than usual. When everyone left, he sat on the edge of the bed, sighing deeply. "I'm getting old, Louise," he said, massaging his sore shoulder. The body doesn't take the strain like before. Then slow down, I suggested, sitting beside him. Mary's almost graduating. Soon she'll be working. Junior's growing up. Soon he'll help out, too. He smiled that sad way. A man only stops when he dies. Woman, I'll endure as long as God gives me strength. If I had known that conversation was a preage, perhaps I would have insisted more, begged him to leave that job to look for something less strenuous. Maybe I could have changed what happened next, but we never know, right? Life doesn't come with an instruction manual, and decisions that seem right at one moment can turn out to be terrible later. Our life continued its rhythm for a few more months. Frank's work, the house, Junior increasingly rebellious at school, Mary preparing to graduate, me trying to keep everything on track as I always did until that day came. The day that divided my life into before and after. The day I lost not only the love of my life, but also without knowing it yet. The innocence of believing that family is a safe harbor. The day I discovered in the cruelest way that sometimes the enemy sleeps under the same roof, eats at the same table, and carries the same blood in their veins. But that's a story for another chapter because there are certain pains for which we need to catch our breath before telling. That day began like any other, and that's what hurts the most when I remember it. There was no sign, no premonition. It was just another ordinary Tuesday in April 1995. I woke up at 5 as always, prepared Frank's coffee, and warmed milk for Junior. Frank ate hurriedly, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, and left for work. The last thing he said to me was, "I'll be home late today. There's a meeting with the bosses." If I had known those would be the last words I'd hear from him, I would have grabbed his arm, prevented him from leaving, invented any excuse to keep him home that day. The phone rang at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was hanging clothes on the line with that strong autumn sun that makes you sweat even when the air is already cooler. I ran inside, hands still wet, heart already tight, because a phone call in the afternoon is never good news. Mrs. Louise Miller. The voice on the other end was deep, formal. Frank Miller's wife. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. My mouth went dry instantly. My legs went weak. Even before he continued, I already knew. Our bodies know these things. Know when the world is about to collapse. "Ma'am, there's been an accident at the factory. Your husband was taken to County General Hospital, but unfortunately, he didn't survive his injuries. Could you come here too?" The rest of the sentence was lost in a buzzing that took over my ears. I don't quite remember what I answered, if I answered anything at all. I only remember sitting on the kitchen floor when I came to the phone falling beside me, making that irritating off-hook sound. How can I tell you what I felt at that moment? It's as if someone ripped off a piece of your body without anesthesia. The pain is so great that it seems it will swallow you whole, that you'll never be able to breathe properly again. That the world has ended and no one else has noticed. I needed to be strong. I had to go to the hospital. Had to call Mary at college. Had to be home when Junior returned from school. My God. How to tell my 15-year-old son that his father would never come back. A neighbor took me to the hospital. I don't even know how I managed to get dressed, lock the house, get into her car. I moved like a robot, doing everything automatically while inside I was completely shattered. The hospital had that smell I'll never forget. Alcohol, disinfectant, and sadness. They took me to a small room where a tired doctor in a stained coat explained what had happened. A machine with a defect, a piece that came loose at high speed, hit Frank's chest with force. Almost instant death, they said. He didn't suffer much, as if that were any consolation. I had to identify the body. My Frank, who left home strong and healthy that morning, was now pale, motionless on a cold metal stretcher. He seemed smaller somehow. I ran my hand through his hair, still with traces of that Brill cream he'd used since he was young. His skin was already cold. I kissed his forehead and promised between tears that I would take care of our children, that they would never forget what a wonderful father they had. From there, I went straight to the police station. There was paperwork to sign, bureaucracies that couldn't wait even when your world had just fallen apart. The sheriff, a man with a thick mustache and tired eyes, said something about investigating the safety conditions at the factory, about possible compensation. Words that went in one ear and out the other. No compensation would bring my Frank back. I returned home when it was already night. Junior was there, restless, pacing back and forth in the small living room. The neighbor had stayed with him but didn't have the courage to break the news. When he saw me come in with swollen eyes, my face washed with tears, he knew. "Dad?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Son, your father." The words caught in my throat. How to say it? How to tear away my boy's childhood with a single sentence? "He died, didn't he?" Junior completed, his eyes already watering. I knew it. I felt it here. He tapped his chest. That night, I held my son as he cried himself to sleep, a cry different from anything I had ever heard from him. It wasn't a child's cry of pain or fear. It was a man's cry who had lost his footing. He was 15, but that night he was 10 years old. I managed to speak with Mary by phone. She wanted to come right away, but I asked her to wait until the next day. The roads were dangerous at night, and I couldn't bear to lose anyone else I loved. The days that followed were a blur of pain and practical tasks, preparing the funeral, receiving condolences, explaining 1,000 times how the accident happened, hearing stories about Frank from people we barely knew, all while trying to maintain composure to be strong for my children, for relatives, for neighbors who came bringing food and comfort. Mary arrived the next day, destroyed. My daughter has always been strong, determined. But that day, she seemed like a little lost girl again. The three of us hugged. Me, her, and Junior, in the middle of the living room, crying together. A broken family trying to hold on to the pieces that remained. The wake was at our house, as was customary in those days. The casket in the living room, chairs borrowed from neighbors lined up. The smell of strong coffee mingling with that of flowers. People coming and going, saying words that should console, but seemed empty in the face of our pain. Junior stayed in a corner, quiet, his eyes swollen and empty. He wasn't crying anymore. He seemed in shock. From time to time, I would go to him, run my hand through his hair, ask if he wanted to eat something, but he would just shake his head, mute. Mary was by my side the whole time, holding my hand, supporting me when my legs weakened. She had inherited her father's strength, the ability to remain firm even when everything was falling apart. The burial would be the next morning. I spent the night awake, sitting next to the coffin, talking softly to my Frank as if he could hear me, recounting our memories, our plans that would now never be realized, asking for strength to continue without him. "How am I going to raise our boy alone, Frank?" I asked, tears silently flowing. "How will I manage everything without you by my side?" Dawn broke, and the funeral home staff came to prepare everything for the burial. I woke the children. We had a quick, silent breakfast. Nobody could eat anything. Mary helped me put on my only black dress, brushed my hair carefully, as I used to do with her when she was little. Roles reversed in the hour of pain. The cemetery was on the other side of town. We were all squeezed into a car borrowed from a neighbor. Me, Mary, Junior, my sister, and her husband. The rest of the people went in other cars, a slow procession through the town streets. The day was beautiful. Ironically, a cloudless blue sky, sun shining as if the world hadn't just collapsed for our family. Birds sang in the cemetery trees. As my husband's coffin slowly descended into that dark grave, the minister spoke words about eternal life, about God having his plans, about Frank being in a better place. I could only think that the best place for him was by my side, raising our children, growing old with me as we had planned since we were young. People tossed flowers, handfuls of earth. Each sound of earth hitting the coffin was like a stab in my chest. When it was over, people began to disperse, returning to their cars, to their lives that continued normally, while mine had been destroyed. I stood there, unable to move, not wanting to leave Frank in that cold, dark place. Mary on one side, Junior on the other, supporting me. "Mom, let's go home," Mary said gently. "You need to rest." I nodded without the strength to argue. My head was throbbing. My whole body ached as if I had been beaten. The pain of loss is physical, too, not just of the heart. We returned home in silence. The neighbors had prepared lunch. The table was set in the living room where hours before my husband's coffin had been. Life has these cruelties. One moment you're mourning your love, the next you need to eat. Continue. as if it were possible. Mary took me to the bedroom, helped me take off the black dress, laid me down on the bed. Rest a bit, Mom. I'll take care of everything out there. I was left alone in that bed that I had shared with Frank for 24 years. His pillow still had his scent, that mixture of Braille cream, cigarettes, and the simple soap he used. I hugged the pillow and finally let out the cry I had been holding all day. Not the polite, silent cry of someone in public, but the raw animal cry that comes from the gut. I don't know how long I stayed there, crying until I had no more tears, until exhaustion overcame me, and I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the house was quiet. The late afternoon light came weakly through the bedroom window. My body ached, my head was heavy, my mouth was dry. I got up with difficulty, dragged myself to the bathroom. I needed to wash my face, brush my teeth, and compose myself a little before facing the children, the relatives who were certainly still in the house. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, the light on. I pushed it gently, entered without making a noise. It was then that I saw him, my son, my boy, my junior. He was standing in front of the mirror, looking at his own reflection with an expression I had never seen before. Hard, cold, almost unrecognizable. Beside him, leaning against the wall of the small bathroom, were 4 young men I knew by sight. Friends of his from school or the street I never knew exactly. They were older, already past 18, always with unfriendly faces. Frank didn't like Junior hanging out with them. Said they were a bad influence, that they would only bring trouble. "Junior," I called, confused by the scene. "What were these guys doing in my bathroom? Why were they all crowded in there? What's going on here, son?" That's when the world turned upside down. That's when I lost not only my husband, but also my son, my dignity, my faith in humanity. My son, that baby I carried in my womb for 9 months, who I breastfed, who I taught to walk, who I held when he had a fever, who I consoled when he fell off his bike, turned to me with eyes I didn't recognize. They weren't my boy's eyes anymore. They were eyes full of such deep, inexplicable hatred that they froze my blood. "Close the door," he said to one of the young men. The voice wasn't the same either. It was a stranger's voice, cold, calculated. "Keep an eye out there. Don't let anyone in, Junior." "What are you?" I couldn't finish the sentence. In a quick movement, he charged at me, pushing me against the wall with such force that I lost my breath. I hit my head on the tiles and saw stars for a moment. "Shut up," he whispered through clenched teeth. "We're finally going to settle our score." I tried to scream, to call for Mary, for someone, but he put his hand over my mouth forcefully. The other young men watched, some laughing softly, others serious with crossed arms guarding the door. What happened in that small bathroom in the minutes that followed is something I try to erase from my memory every day. My own son, my flesh and blood, violated not just my body, but my soul, my essence as a mother, as a woman, as a human being. Between punches and slaps that silenced my screams, he repeated words of hatred that pierced me deeper than any physical pain. "You killed my father," he said. "You sucked the life out of him all these years, made him work until he died." I tried to speak, to explain, to beg. I couldn't understand where so much hatred, so much anger came from. Where was my boy? What had happened to him? How could love transform into something so monstrous? "You're all the same," he continued as he assaulted me. "You suck the life out of men and then pretend to be your victims." His friends watched everything, some encouraging, others just making sure no one came in, that no one saved me from that hell. I managed to recognize some. They were the boys that Frank had warned me about, those who had a bad reputation in the neighborhood, who had already been involved with petty crimes, with drugs. I don't know how long it lasted. When something so terrible happens, time seems to distort. It could have been minutes or hours. I only know that when it ended, when he finally stopped, I was lying on the cold bathroom floor, curled up, bleeding, trembling, trying to cover myself with the torn pieces of my clothes. He straightened up, looking at me with contempt, as if I were an insect he had just crushed. He leaned down, brought his face close to mine, and said the words that will haunt me until the end of my days. Learn your lesson, you. You should never have been my mother. You killed my father with all your stress. Women are the plague of this world. Then he left with his friends, leaving me there, destroyed in every possible way. I heard the front door slam, voices moving away down the street. I remained paralyzed, unable to move, to scream, to do anything but breathe in short, painful gasps. I don't know how long I stayed there, thrown on that bathroom floor. It seemed my body had turned to stone, that I would never be able to get up again. The physical pain was terrible. I felt my face swollen from the blows, my ribs hurting with each breath, finger marks on my arms, on my legs. But the pain in my soul, that was unbearable. It was Carol, my childhood friend, who found me. She had come to bring soup like so many other neighbors in those days of mourning. She heard my weak moans and found me fallen in the bathroom. My God in heaven, Louise, what happened? Who did this to you? I couldn't answer. How to explain the unexplainable? How to say that my own son on the day of his father's burial had done this to me? Carol helped me get up, took me to the bedroom, cleaned my wounds. Her hands trembled as she applied hydrogen peroxide to the cuts as she helped me put on clean clothes. Was it a robbery? Did someone break into the house? She asked, trying to understand. I shook my head. I couldn't speak, couldn't form words. It was as if my voice had been torn out along with my dignity in that bathroom. We need to call the police, Louise. You need to go to the hospital again. I just shook my head. Police? Hospital? How would I explain? Who would believe me? And even if they did believe, how could I report my own son? The last piece I had left of my Frank. At least tell me where Junior is, Carol insisted. He needs to know what happened to his mother. That's when I finally managed to speak. My voice comes out as a hoarse whispers. It was him. Carol froze. The compress of cold water she was holding against my face falling on the bed. It was him. What? Louise? What are you saying? It was Junior. Him and his friends. He hurt me. The words died in my throat. I couldn't say it. Couldn't name what had happened. I saw the horror grow in my friend's eyes as she understood. I saw the disbelief, the shock, then the anger. No, she said, shaking her head. It can't be. He's your son. He just lost his father. You must be confused. In shock. I wished it were true. I wished I were confused. I had imagined it all, but the marks on my body, the pain in my soul, the echo of his words in my mind. It was all too real. Carol stayed with me all night. She gave me a sedative she had in her purse, made me drink a hot tea, sat beside the bed holding my hand as I fell into a restless sleep full of nightmares. Junior didn't come back home that night, nor the next one. On the third night, I heard the front door opening late at night, footsteps in the hallway, his bedroom door closing. I trembled under the covers, my heart racing with fear. Would he come to hurt me again? Would it be worse this time? I didn't sleep at all, my eyes fixed on my bedroom door that had no lock. In the morning, when the sun was already high, I mustered the courage to leave the room. The house was quiet. I found Junior in the kitchen eating a piece of bread as if nothing had happened. When he saw me with my still swollen face, the bruises visible on my arms, he just gave a sideways smile. There was no remorse, no regret. There was only that cold, calculated hatred that I couldn't comprehend. "Good morning, Mommy," he said with cruel irony in his voice. "Did you sleep well?" I didn't answer. I couldn't look him in the eyes, couldn't stay in the same room. I went back to my room, trembling, nauseous. I sat on the bed, my hands gripping the sheet tightly. It was then that I made the most difficult decision of my life, a decision that no mother should ever have to make. But I saw no other way out. I couldn't continue living under the same roof as him, not after what happened, not with that constant fear, that pain, that betrayal that was too great to bear. Mary had returned to college 2 days after the burial, reluctant to leave me alone. But I had insisted I would be fine, that I needed the routine, that Junior would be with me. Little did she know what would happen hours after her departure. I called her from a payphone on the corner, not brave enough to use the house phone, afraid Junior would hear. When she answered, my voice failed. How to tell my daughter what her brother had done? How to destroy the image she had of him? How to break her heart that was already so broken by the loss of her father. "Mom, is everything okay? Why are you crying?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Honey, I need your help. Can I stay with you for a few days?" The silence on the other end showed her surprise. I had never asked for something like this before. Never wanted to leave home, leave things behind. "Of course, Mom. Of course you can. Did something happen? Is Junior okay?" "He's fine," I replied, the words coming out are bitter from my mouth. "I'll explain when I get there. I'll take the bus tomorrow morning. But Mom, you've never traveled alone. Do you want me to come get you?" "No, honey. I need to do this. Just wait for me at the bus station, okay?" I returned home, my heart heavy. The decision was made. I waited for Junior to leave. He spent most of his time on the street now with those friends I so feared. When I was sure he wouldn't return so soon, I began to pack a small suitcase. Some clothes, important documents, the few pieces of jewelry I had, my wedding ring, a necklace Frank gave me when we completed 15 years together, and my mother's earrings. I looked around the house where I had lived for so many years, where I had raised my children, where I had been happy beside my husband. Every corner held memories, some sweet, others now tainted by what had happened. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. My hand was shaking so much I could barely hold the pen, but I needed to leave those words, needed him to understand why I was leaving, even though I doubted he would care. "Junior," I wrote, tears blurring my vision, falling on the paper. "I don't know what I did to you, son. For you to think this of me, to do what you did, but clearly you can no longer live with your mother. You have one day to pay the rent for the house. I refuse to pay after what you did to me." I stopped, looking at the words on the page. They were insufficient, unable to express the devastation I felt, the wound that would never heal. But they were the only ones I could find. I finished the letter, placed it on the table where he would certainly see it. I took my suitcase, gave one last look at the house that would no longer be my home, and walked out the door without looking back. I walked to the bus station with the suitcase weighing not only in my arms, but in my soul. I bought a ticket to the city where Mary studied, waited for the bus, sitting on a bench, my eyes fixed on the ground, trying not to think, not to feel. When the bus finally departed, when the familiar streets began to be left behind, I allowed the tears to fall again. I cried for the husband I lost, for the son I would never see again, for the life I had built with such care, and that was now in ruins. The 5-hour journey seemed endless. I looked out the window without really seeing the landscape, lost in my thoughts, in my pains. The other passengers must have thought I was in mourning, and I was in so many different ways. When I finally reached my destination, I saw Mary waiting for me on the platform. My daughter, my light, my salvation. She ran to me as soon as she saw me getting off the bus, but stopped halfway, her eyes wide with shock at seeing my still marked face. My way of walking curved from the pain in my ribs. "Mom, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to speak there amid so many people. "At home, honey. I'll tell you everything at home." The apartment that Mary shared with 2 roommates was small, simple, typical of students. A worn couch, a coffee table covered with books, a cramped kitchen. But at that moment, it seemed to me the most welcoming place in the world. Her roommates, sensing we needed privacy, invented some commitment and left. It was just the 2 of us sitting on that old couch, my hands between hers. "Now tell me, Mom, what happened? Was it a robbery? Did someone break into the house?" I took a deep breath. If there was one person in the world to whom I could tell the truth, it was Mary. My daughter, so strong, so sensible, so much like her father in determination, and like me in sensitivity. "It was your brother," I said, my voice almost gone. "Junior hurt me. Him and some friends." I saw the confusion on her face, the disbelief. "What do you mean, Junior? He hit you? Why did you argue? How to explain the unexplainable? How to put into words the horror of those moments in the bathroom?" "It wasn't just hitting, honey," I finally managed to say, tears returning forcefully. "It was worse. Much worse." Gradually, between sobs and pauses, I told her what had happened. Not all the details. There are things a mother can't say to her daughter, no matter how close they are, but enough for her to understand the gravity, the horror, the unforgivable betrayal. Mary listened to everything in silence, her hands squeezing mine so tightly they hurt. I saw her face go through all the emotions: shock, disbelief, disgust, fury. When I finished, she jumped up, pacing back and forth in the small living room. "We have to call the police. He can't go unpunished. Those friends of his, too. This is a crime, Mom. A heinous crime." "No," I replied, shaking my head firmly. "I don't want the police. I don't want anyone to know. I just want to forget. Start over away from him." "But Mom, he needs to pay for what he did. He's already lost his mother," I interrupted. "Just as I've lost a son. Isn't that punishment enough?" Mary sat down again beside me, hugging me carefully so as not to hurt my ribs. We cried together, mother and daughter, mourning not only Frank's death, but now also the loss of Junior. Not through death, but through something perhaps even more definitive. That night, lying on the couch that Mary had arranged for me as a bed, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling, I wondered where I had gone wrong. What could I have done differently in raising my son that he wouldn't have turned into that? Was it the absence of his father working so much? Was it those friends, those bad influences? Or was there something rotten inside him from the beginning? Something that no mother's love could cure? I found no answers. Only the painful certainty that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, that some acts are so monstrous that there is no turning back, no possible forgiveness, not even from mother to son. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror of the small bathroom in the apartment. My face was still swollen, purple and yellowish marks standing out on the pale skin. My eyes seemed hollow, opaque, as if the light they once had been extinguished. "Who are you now, Louise?" I asked the woman in the mirror. "Who will you be without Frank? Without your home? Without your son?" I didn't have an answer yet. I only knew I had to move forward one step at a time. At least I still had Mary. At least I wasn't completely alone in the world. And so in that small college town in my daughter's cramped apartment, I began to rebuild my life from the pieces that remained. One day at a time, one pain at a time, one small breath of hope at a time. But the wound my son opened in my heart, that never completely healed, and I very much doubt it ever will. That morning of the burial, the sky dawned gray, as if even nature respected our pain. It had rained during the night, a fine drizzle that left everything damp, with that smell of wet earth that reminds me of childhood. I wore the only black dress I had, kept in the back of the wardrobe for sad occasions I never imagined would come so soon. Mary helped me fix my hair, put a little powder on my face to disguise the paleness. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't even apply lipstick properly. How could a still young woman at 43 be getting ready for her husband's funeral? Life has these cruelties that we're never prepared to face. "Everything will be okay, Mom," Mary would say, holding my shoulders, looking at me with those eyes so similar to her father's. But we both knew it was a lie. Nothing would be okay. Not so soon. Perhaps never again. Junior appeared at the bedroom door, already dressed, a dark shirt that was big on him, probably borrowed from a neighbor. He was pale, redayed, and hair disheveled. He looked so young, so fragile at that moment, that my mother's heart tightened. Despite the problems, despite the rebellion of recent times, he was still my son, my boy who had just lost his father. "Everyone's waiting," he said, his voice. "The funeral home car has arrived." The wake had been at our house, as was customary. The small living room was crowded with people, relatives we hadn't seen in years. Frank's colleagues from work, neighbors, acquaintances, each with their story about my husband, each with their condolences that brought no comfort at all. The departure of the coffin from the house was the first moment I felt I was going to collapse completely. Seeing that dark wooden box where the body of the man with whom I had shared more than half of my life lay being carried out, it was as if they were tearing a piece of me along with it. Mary held me firmly, preventing me from falling. Junior walked behind the coffin, his face expressionless, his fists closed so tightly that his knuckles were white. The cemetery wasn't far. We walked in a slow, silent procession, cutting through the neighborhood streets. Neighbors came to their doors, took off their hats in respect, and made the sign of the cross. Frank was known, respected in the community. A hard-working, honest man, a good family man. At least that's what everyone thought. What I also thought, until I discovered in the worst possible way that inside my own house grew a monster I didn't recognize. The burial itself was quick as these things are. The coffin slowly descended into that dark grave. The minister talked about eternal life, about reunion in paradise. Words that seemed empty in the face of the brutal reality of that hole in the ground that would now forever hold my Frank's body. I threw a white rose on the coffin, tears blurring my vision. "Rest in peace, my love," I whispered, feeling that a part of me was descending with him into the darkness. After the ceremony, people began to return to their lives. Some went to our house, where the neighbors had organized a small lunch. Food I had no appetite to eat. Company I had no strength to endure. But that's how things worked. It was the ritual of death that we follow without questioning, even when everything seems meaningless. At the house, I felt suffocated with so many people, so many voices, so many looks of pity. I needed a moment alone, a moment to breathe, to try to assimilate that I was now a widow, that I had to raise a teenage son alone, that all the life I knew had ended. "I'm going to the bathroom," I murmured to Mary, who hadn't left my side for even a minute. "I'll be right back." I walked down the narrow hallway to the bathroom at the back of the house. It was the only place where I could have a bit of privacy at that moment. I entered, locked the door, rested my forehead against the cold tile wall, and finally let out the sob that was stuck in my throat. "Frank, how will I live without you?" I murmured into nothing, the tears running freely down my face. "How will I bear waking up every day knowing you won't come back?" I don't know how long I stayed there crying silently. It could have been minutes or hours. When I finally calmed down a bit, I washed my face with cold water, trying to disguise the swollen eyes, the red nose. I took a few deep breaths, preparing to return to that room full of people, to that role of strong widow that everyone expected me to play. I was unlocking the door when I heard voices approaching in the hallway. Male voices, young, speaking softly, but in a tone that made me freeze where I stood. "She's in there for sure." It was Junior's voice. I saw her coming here, and the other people asked another voice I didn't recognize. "They're all in the living room eating. Nobody's going to come looking here. You guys stand guard. Give a signal if anything happens." My heart accelerated. Something in my son's tone gave me a fear I had never felt before, a primordial animal instinct of imminent danger. Before I could react, the door was pushed open forcefully. Junior entered, followed by 4 young men, and I vaguely recognized friends of his from school or the street, those that Frank always said were bad company. "What do you want?" I asked, backing up until I hit the sink. "Junior, what's going on?" My son was looking at me in a way I had never seen before. There was no sadness for the father he had just buried, no respect that we had always taught he should have for his mother. His eyes were cold, hard, full of a hatred I didn't understand. "It's your time to pay, old lady," he said, closing the door behind him. 2 of the young men stood guard, the other 2 beside him, all staring at me as if I were some kind of cornered prey. "Pay for what, son?" I asked, my voice trembling, trying to buy time, trying to understand what was happening. "What are you talking about?" "For my father," he replied, coming closer. I could smell alcohol on his breath, mixed with another odor I didn't recognize at the time, but later knew was drugs. "You killed him, making him work like a condemned man while you stayed at home doing nothing." "Junior," I never tried to explain, shocked by the accusation. How could he think this? How could he blame me for his father's death? For the accident at the factory? "Your father and we couldn't finish." The first blow came quickly, a slap to the face with such force that I staggered backward, hitting my head against the wall. The pain was sharp, immediate, but the shock was even greater. My son had hit me. My son had raised his hand against me. "Shut up!" he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "I don't want to hear your lies. You women are all the same. You only know how to suck the life out of men and then pretend you're victims." What happened in the minutes that followed is something I try to block from my memory every day. The hands of my own son, which I once held when he was learning to walk, now assaulted me with a violence I never imagined possible. punches to the stomach that made me lose my breath, slaps to the face that blurred my vision, hair pulling that tore out entire locks. And it wasn't just physical violence, it was the hatred in every word that came out of his mouth. A hatred against me, against women in general, fed by who knows what influences, what distortions, what poison someone had poured into my son's ear when I wasn't looking. His friends watched everything, some laughing, others serious, but none doing anything to prevent it. On the contrary, they were there to ensure no one came in, that no one saved me from that nightmare. At some point, when I had already fallen on the floor, almost without strength to defend myself, I felt his hands tearing my dress, touching my body in a way no son should ever touch a mother. It was then that I understood that the horror had only begun, that he planned an even deeper, more unforgivable violation. "No, son," I begged, gathering what little strength I had left. "Please don't do this. I'm your mother. I carried you in my womb. I breastfed you. I raised you with so much love." For an instant, I saw something pass through his eyes. A flash of hesitation, perhaps the last vestige of the boy he once was. But it quickly disappeared, swallowed by the hatred, the anger, by whatever was consuming him from within. "You are not my mother," he spat the words. "You're just another woman who destroyed the life of a good man." What did he do next? How to describe the worst pain a woman, a mother, can feel? It wasn't just my body that was violated in that small bathroom. It was my soul, my essence. Everything I believed about family, about love, about the world. I closed my eyes, tried to transport myself to another place, another time. I thought of Frank, of our first meeting at the church fundraiser, of the way he smiled shilly, of the smell of Brill cream in his hair. I thought of our children when they were small, of Sundays in the park, of winter nights around the stove telling stories. I tried to cling to these memories while my present transformed into the worst possible nightmare. When it finally ended, when he finally got off me, I was more dead than alive. Not physically. My heart was still beating, my lungs still breathing, but something inside me had been destroyed forever. Something that would never return. No matter how much time passed, Junior stood up, straightened his clothes, looking at me, lying on the floor with an icy contempt. His friends were restless, whispering that they should leave before someone appeared. He bent down one last time, bringing his face close to mine. I could see every detail of those eyes that were once so similar to his father's, but that I no longer recognized. "Learn your lesson, you. You should never have been my mother," he said, his voice low but clear. "You killed my father with all your stress. Women are the plague of this world." Then he left along with the others, leaving me there, broken in every sense of the word. I heard the front door slamming, voices moving away down the street, and then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence full of a pain so great it couldn't fit in my chest. I couldn't move. Every inch of my body hurt, but the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the agony in my soul. How can a son do this to his own mother? How could that baby I cradled so many nights, that child I taught to read, to write, to pray, transform into this? I don't know how long I stayed there on that bathroom floor. It seemed my body had turned to stone, that I would never be able to get up again. Reality had become so unbearable that my mind was trying to escape, to float away from that broken body, from that endless pain. It was Carol, my childhood friend, who found me. She had come to see how I was, worried because she hadn't seen me for a while in the living room with the others. She heard my weak moans when she passed through the hallway, opened the bathroom door, and found me in that deplorable state. The shock on her face, the horror, the disbelief. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected everything I was feeling myself. "My God in heaven, Louise, what happened? Who did this to you?" I couldn't answer. The words were stuck in my throat, suffocated by the shame, by the horror of what had happened. How to tell someone, even such a close friend, that my own son had done this to me? How to put into words something so monstrous, so against nature? Carol didn't wait for an answer. With a strength I didn't imagine that frail woman had, she helped me get up, took me stumbling to my room. There, with gentle but efficient gestures, she cleaned my wounds, helped me put on a clean nightgown, laid me on the bed. "I'm going to call the police," she said, determined, already picking up the phone beside the bed. Whoever did this needs to pay. No, I managed to shout, gathering strength I didn't know I still had. Don't call anyone, please. She looked at me confused, the phone still in her hand. What do you mean, not call anyone? Look what they did to you. This is a crime, Louise. It can't stay like this. I can't, I whispered, the tears starting to flow again. I can't report it. Why not? Are you protecting someone? Who did this, Louise? Was it a robbery? Did someone break into the house? I closed my eyes, unable to look at her as I told the terrible truth. It was Junior, I murmured, so low that she had to lean in to hear. My son did this to me. The silence that followed was absolute. When I opened my eyes, I saw Carol paralyzed, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. No, she finally said, shaking her head. It can't be. He's your son. He just lost his father. You must be confused. In shock. I wished she were right. I wished I were confused, delirious, imagining things. But the marks on my body, the excruciating pain between my legs, the echo of his words in my mind, it was all too real. It was him, I repeated, my voice firmer now, the terrible truth solidifying as I pronounced it. Him and his friends, they held me down. He hit me. He did things a son should never do to a mother. I saw understanding grow in my friend's eyes, followed by a horror so deep that not even words could express it. She brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. My God, Louise, how? Why? I shook my head, tears now flowing freely. He blames me for his father's death, said I made Frank work until he died, that women are the plague of the world. Carol sat on the edge of the bed, her hand still covering her mouth, her body trembling slightly with the shock. After a moment, she reached out and held mine, squeezing tightly. We have to call the police, she said, her voice softer now, but still determined. This can't stay like this. He needs to pay for what he did. No, I exclaimed again, desperation giving me strength. He's my son, Carol. My boy. As monstrous as what he did was, I can't send my son to jail. But Louise, he's not your boy anymore. What he did? This is unforgivable. It's a crime. It's monstrous. I know, I replied, my voice breaking into sobs. Believe me, I know better than anyone. But I can't. I simply can't. Carol was silent for a long moment, still holding my hand. Finally, she sighed deeply. And what are you going to do then? You can't continue living here with him. Not after this. I won't, I replied. The decision already made, even if it hurt like tearing off a piece of myself. I'm leaving. I'm going to live with Mary and Junior. Will you leave him here in this house? He's almost a man now, I replied, a bitterness I had never felt before, coloring my words. He chose his path. Now he has to bear the consequences. I'm going to cut off the money. I won't pay the bills anymore. Let him figure it out as he wanted to figure it out today, like a man. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. It was putting as much distance as possible between me and the one who had destroyed not only my body, but my faith in human goodness, my belief in family as a refuge. Carol stayed with me all night. She gave me a sedative she had in her purse, made me drink a hot tea, sat beside the bed holding my hand as I oscillated between consciousness and a restless sleep populated by nightmares. Junior didn't come back home that night, nor the next one. On the third night, I woke up startled to hear the front door opening, footsteps in the hallway, his bedroom door closing. I trembled under the covers, my heart racing with fear. Would he come to hurt me again? Would it be worse this time? I didn't sleep at all, my eyes fixed on my bedroom door that had no lock. In the morning, when the sun was already high, I heard him in the kitchen, gathering all the courage I had left. I got up, dressed in clothes that hid most of the bruises, and left the room. He was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a piece of bread as if nothing had happened. When he saw me with my still swollen face, the bruises visible where the clothes didn't cover, he just gave a cold smile without emotion. Good morning, Mommy, he said, his voice loaded with cruel irony. Did you sleep well? I didn't answer. I couldn't look him in the eyes. couldn't stay in the same room. I went back to my room, trembling, nauseous, fear, and repulsion choking me. It was then that I decided I couldn't wait even one more day. I had to leave that house immediately before he decided to finish what he had started. I waited for him to leave. He spent most of his time on the street now with those friends I so feared. When I was sure he wouldn't return so soon, I began to pack a small suitcase. Some clothes, important documents, the few pieces of jewelry I had, my wedding ring, a necklace Frank gave me when we completed 15 years together, my mother's earrings. I looked around the house where I had lived for so many years, where I had raised my children, where I had been happy beside my husband. Every corner held memories, some sweet, others now tainted by what had happened. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. My hand was shaking so much I could barely hold the pen. But I needed to leave those words. I needed him to understand why I was leaving, even though I doubted he would care. Junior, I wrote, tears blurring my vision. I don't know what I did to you, son, for you to think this of me, to do what you did. But clearly you can no longer live with your mother. You have one day to pay the rent for the house. I refuse to pay after what you did to me. Leaving that letter on the kitchen table was like tearing out a piece of my own heart and leaving it there, bleeding. The words I wrote were blurred by tears I couldn't contain. Even after everything he had done, he was my son, the creature I carried in my womb for 9 months, who I watched take his first steps, who I taught to speak, to write, to pray. How does a mother abandon a son? How does she cut that invisible cord that has linked us since the first breath of life? But I had no choice. Staying would mean dying. Perhaps not of the body, but certainly of the soul. Or worse, maybe next time he wouldn't stop. Maybe next time the violence would be even greater. And how could I live under the same roof as that stranger who wore my son's face, but whose eyes I no longer recognized? I left through the back door, the heavy suitcase in my hand, even heavier in my heart. The small yard where Junior played as a child, where Frank planted his roses on weekends, where we were happy without knowing that happiness is as fragile as a soap bubble. I took one last look, engraving it in my memory, knowing I would never return. I walked to the bus station like a sleepwalker. The streets were the same as always, the people the same, everything equal. But I was different, unrecognizable even to myself. The Louise who entered that bathroom on the day of her husband's funeral was not the same person who now bought a bus ticket to another city. I sat on a secluded bench waiting for the departure time, trying to become invisible. I didn't want to meet any acquaintances. I didn't want to explain the bruises on my face. I didn't want to lie, but also couldn't tell the truth. Some truths are too heavy to even be spoken aloud. When the bus finally arrived, I boarded with difficulty. My whole body ached. Each movement was a reminder of the horror I had lived through. I chose a seat in the last row, far from the other passengers, and curled up against the window. As the bus left behind the familiar streets, the places where I had lived my entire life, I felt a mixture of relief and devastation. I was fleeing, yes, but sometimes fleeing is the only possible act of courage when all other doors have closed. The journey lasted 5 hours. That seemed like 5 years. My mind wouldn't stop reliving the terrible moments, trying to understand how I had reached that point. Where had I gone wrong in raising my son? What seed of hatred had grown inside him without me noticing? How did I not see the signs? How did I not prevent it from reaching this point? I arrived in Mary's city already in the late afternoon. She was waiting for me at the bus station, her face tense with concern. When she saw me getting off the bus, limping slightly, my face still swollen despite the days that had passed, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she murmured, running to me, stopping halfway, not knowing how to hug me without hurting me more. "It's all right, honey," I lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Let's go home." The apartment that Mary shared with 2 roommates was small, simple, typical of students, but at that moment, it seemed like a palace to me. A refuge, the only safe harbor in a world that had turned upside down. The girls were kind, didn't ask questions about my condition, about the reason for my sudden arrival. Mary must have invented some story, something that didn't involve the terrible truth. They offered the living room couch to me, insisted it was no bother, that I could stay as long as I needed. That first night, lying on that strange couch, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling, I cried silently until I had no more tears. I cried for the husband I had lost, for the son who had betrayed me in the worst possible way, for the life I knew and would never have back. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The bruises faded, the physical pains diminishing, but the wound in my soul seemed like it would never close. I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, reliving those terrible moments in the bathroom. Mary would come running, hug me, cry with me, powerless in the face of a pain no one could heal. A week after my arrival, I received a call. It was Mrs. Sullivan, our neighbor of years, who had my contact at Mary's house in case of emergency. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice hesitant. "Sorry to bother you, but aren't you coming back? Junior is here alone, not going to school. There are strange young men coming and going from the house at all hours. The electricity was cut off yesterday. I felt a tightness in my chest. As much as I tried to tear it out, a mother's love was still there, buried under layers of trauma and pain. "I'm not coming back, Mrs. Sullivan," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "Junior, he did something unforgivable. Now he'll have to figure things out on his own. But Mrs. Miller, he's just a boy. He just lost his father. He's 15. He's not a child anymore." I cut her off, unable to hear more, and some actions have consequences. He chose his path. Now he'll have to walk it. I hung up without waiting for a response, my hands trembling. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but there was no going back. I could no longer be a mother to the one who had destroyed not only my body but my soul. In the days that followed, I received more similar calls from the school wanting to know why Junior wasn't attending classes, from other neighbors concerned about the state of the house, about the people frequenting it, about strange noises during the night. Each call was a stab in the heart, a reminder of the failure, the shame, the pain. Mary, seeing my suffering, suggested we change the phone number. "You don't owe anything to anyone, Mom. You don't need to go through this every time the phone rings." I agreed. It was cowardly, perhaps, but I didn't have the strength to continue being the point of contact for a son who had violated me in the worst possible way. The new number was a small liberation. At least the phone calls stopped. Time passes slowly as only time passes when we are suffering. 1 month, 2, 3. The physical wounds healed completely, but those of the soul remained open, bleeding with each memory, each bad dream, each time I saw a young man on the street who reminded me of Junior. Mary graduated that same year. A beautiful ceremony where she wore her father's tie, carefully kept among her things. I cried with pride, seeing my daughter receiving her diploma, thinking about how Frank would have been happy, how he would have puffed out his chest, seeing our girl achieving the dream he couldn't achieve. I got a job at a small fabric store near the apartment. Nothing much. Just enough not to be a burden to Mary, to have my own money, my independence. At 43, I was starting from scratch, learning to live a life I had never imagined for myself. Sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, I thought about Junior. What had happened to him? Where was he? Had he followed an even worse path with no one to guide, to set limits? Or had he somehow found redemption, repentance for what he did? I had no answers. And perhaps it was better that way. It was Mary who, 6 months after my departure, brought news of him. She had gone to our hometown to resolve pending matters with the house, which remained in my name, though I no longer wanted to return there. "I found Junior, Mom," she said, sitting beside me on the couch that had become my bed in recent months. "He's living with an uncle, Dad's brother. The house was evicted. He didn't pay the bills, as you imagined." I felt a lump in my throat. As much as I tried, I couldn't completely tear out a mother's love from my heart. Did he ask about me? Mary hesitated, biting her lip as she had done since childhood when she didn't want to say something that might hurt me. "No, Mom. He said horrible things about you. He seems worse than before. He's using hard drugs from what the uncle told me, hanging out with very dangerous people." I closed my eyes, feeling a different pain now. No longer the acute pain of betrayal, but the dull pain of definitive loss. My son was dead, not in body, but in soul. The one who grew inside me, who I cradled on fever nights, who I taught to take his first steps, no longer existed. In his place was a stranger, a monster fed by hatred and drugs. He did this to himself, I finally said, wiping away a solitary tear. We gave love, education, and values. He chose to throw it all away. Now he has to live with the consequences, just as I live with mine. Mary nodded, holding my hand between hers. You're not to blame, Mom. Some people are born with something broken inside them. Not all the love in the world can fix it. That night, after everyone was asleep, I took a paper and pen. I began to write a letter to my son, not to the monster he had become, but to the boy he once was. To the baby I held in my arms with so much love, so many dreams. My son, I wrote, tears falling on the paper. I don't know where I went wrong, where we lost our way. I only know that what you did to me that day destroyed not only my body, but my soul. It took away the mother I was, the faith I had in human goodness, in family as a safe harbor. I wrote page after page, pouring out all the pain, all the confusion, all the love that still remained despite everything. When I finished, I carefully folded the paper and kept it in a drawer. I never sent that letter. I knew it wouldn't help that the son to whom I was writing no longer existed. Almost 3 years after Frank's death, after that terrible day in the bathroom, Mary was transferred at work to another city, even farther away. A better job, an opportunity she couldn't refuse. You're coming with me, right, Mom? She asked, her eyes full of hope. I thought for a moment. I had already rebuilt a bit of my life there. I had a job at the fabric store, had made some friends, and had a routine that, if not happy, was at least bearable. But what really tied me to this place? The proximity to the city where everything happened, the painful memories that still haunted me. Of course I will, honey, I replied, feeling for the first time in a long time something like hope. We'll go together. Start over. The move was a real fresh start. New city, new people. No one who knew my story. No one who looked at me with pity or morbid curiosity. I could just be Louise, the nice lady who worked at the craft store, the proud mother of the successful lawyer. Gradually, very slowly, I relearned how to live. Not like before. It would never be like before. But a new life that had its moments of peace, of small joys, of calm after the storm. I learned to smile again, even if the smile rarely reached my eyes. I learned to talk to strangers without fearing they would somehow discover my past, my shame. I learned to sleep without waking up screaming in the middle of the night, even if the nightmares never completely disappeared. In 2001, 6 years after everything, Mary got married. A good, gentle man who treated her as she deserved. The ceremony was small, intimate, just the closest friends, as I watched her walking down the aisle. So beautiful in the white dress I had helped her choose. I thought of Frank, of how proud he would have been of that moment. He's here, Mom, Mary whispered when she hugged me after the ceremony, as if reading my thoughts. Dad is here, I'm sure. I nodded, unable to speak, emotion tightening my throat. Maybe she was right. Maybe Frank was there somehow, sharing that moment of happiness after so much pain. During the party, sitting in a corner, watching the young people dance, I thought about everything I had lived through in recent years. The losses, the pains, but also the small daily victories, the strength I didn't know I had until I needed it. I thought about Junior, too, as always happened in important moments. He should have been there beside his sister, celebrating. He should have grown up, matured, become the man Frank dreamed he would be. But his choices led him down another path, a path that separated him from us forever. The following year, I had news of him for the first time in a long while. Not directly, we never spoke again, never saw each other again. It was through a former neighbor who found Mary by chance on a trip. Your brother is in prison, she told her hesitantly, not knowing the size of the wound she was touching. He robbed a store, hurt the owner, and got 10 years in jail. Mary didn't tell me immediately. She kept the news for weeks, perhaps trying to spare me more pain. But eventually she spoke, carefully, choosing her words, watching me closely to see how I would react. I remained silent for a long time after she finished. I didn't know what to feel. Sadness, anger, satisfied revenge, Relief to know he couldn't hurt anyone else for a while. It was the path he was following. I finally said no one could stop him. Not me, not his father, not you. He chose every step he took. That night, alone in my room, I cried for the boy I had lost. Not for the man he became. That one I didn't know. Didn't want to know. But for the bright-eyed little boy who once ran into my arms when he got hurt. Who asked for stories at bedtime. Who said, "I love you, Mom," before closing his eyes. Where had that boy gone? At what moment had he transformed into that being full of hatred, capable of the worst violence against his own mother? Questions without answers, wounds without cure. The years went by. Mary had 2 beautiful children. First Anna Louise, then Peter. Being a grandmother was a balm I hadn't expected. Those children brought back something I thought I had lost forever. The ability to love unconditionally, to give myself without fear. With them, I could be the mother I always wanted to be. Patient, loving, present. I could tell stories, bake cookies, teach little life lessons without the weight of total responsibility, without the fear of creating something that would one day turn against me. "You're the best grandma in the world," Mary would say, watching me play on the floor with the children, ignoring my knees that already ached with age. "They're so lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I'd reply. And it was true. After so much darkness, these children were rays of sunshine in my life, proof that there was still beauty and goodness in the world. I never told them about the uncle they never knew. When they asked, I would just say that he lived very far away, that he had taken a different path. It wasn't a lie, just a softened version of a truth too heavy for innocent children. In 2010, 15 years after Frank's death, I received a letter. The envelope had the stamp of a penitentiary in the north. My heart raced when I recognized the handwriting on the front. It was Junior's handwriting, more mature now, but still with those curves I remembered from when he signed his school assignments. I stared at the envelope for hours, unable to open it, unable to throw it away. What could he want after so much time? Forgiveness, money, reconciliation. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened it. The letter was short, just half a page. It said he had been in prison for several years, that he had time to think about what he'd done, that he had repented. He asked forgiveness not only for what he did on that terrible day, but for all the times he had hurt me, had disappointed me and his father. He said he understood if I didn't want to respond, but that he needed to say these things before it was too late. At the end, a phrase that broke me inside. "I know I don't deserve to be called a son, but you will always be my mother, even if I don't deserve to be your son." I cried over that paper until the tears blurred the ink, until I could barely read the words. It was the request for forgiveness that a part of me had always hoped for, had always wished for, even without admitting it. But could I forgive? Could I really overcome what he had done? The way he had shattered, not just my body, but my soul, my trust in the world, my faith in human goodness. I didn't respond to the letter that day, nor the next day, nor the following week. I kept it in a drawer along with that other one I had written years before and never sent. 2 letters, 2 ends of a broken thread that had once connected us as mother and son. A month later, I received another call. It was a chaplain from the prison. He informed me that Junior had been stabbed in a fight between inmates. He didn't survive. My son was dead. The shock was immense. Even after so many years of separation, even after everything, because in the end, no matter how much I tried to deny it, no matter what he had done, he was still blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, a part of me that was now definitively lost. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. The ghosts of that terrible day in the bathroom were still too vivid, the trauma too deep. But I asked the chaplain to place a white flower on the coffin for me. A single flower, a final gesture from a mother who, despite everything, never managed to completely tear out the love she felt. That night, after everyone was asleep, I took the 2 letters from the drawer, the one I wrote and never sent, the one I received and never answered. I sat on the porch under the starry sky and read them both, one after the other. 2 parts of a tragic story. 2 voices of a family shattered by forces I never fully understood. Then slowly I tore both letters into small pieces. I opened my hand and let the night breeze carry them away, scattering them into the darkness. A silent goodbye, a late closure to a chapter of my life that now finally could end. "Rest in peace, my son," I murmured. "To the sky, to the wind, to nothing. May you find on the other side the peace you didn't find here." And for the first time in 15 years, I cried for my son without anger, without fear, without the crushing weight of betrayal. I cried just as a mother who lost her child, as Frank would have cried if he had known the fate of our boy. That night, something changed inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. It was something different, something like acceptance. The acceptance that life sometimes strikes us in ways we cannot understand or control, that some stories don't have happy endings no matter how much we wish they did, and that continuing to live despite everything is perhaps the greatest act of courage we can perform. Life went on. Mary prospered in her career. The grandchildren grew strong and healthy. I have aged. My hair has become white. My body bent a little more each year, but inside something had strengthened. A resilience that only those who have survived the worst can understand. And now at 73, looking back at the long and winding road I've traveled, I understand that my story is not just one of pain. It's also of survival, of reconstruction, of finding small joys even after the worst storm, of learning that family is not just blood, but choice, care, respect. Abandoning my son was the most difficult decision of my life, but it was also the only one possible at that moment. To survive, to rebuild myself, to find some kind of peace after the unthinkable. And if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that there are no pure villains or heroes in real stories. We are all made of light and shadow, of rights and wrongs, of moments of strength and of weakness. What matters is how we choose to continue after the storm passes, how we rebuild what was destroyed, how we find meaning even in the greatest pain. Moving to the city where Mary lived was the first step in rebuilding the pieces of my life. In the beginning, I felt like an intruder in the small apartment she shared with her friends, a leftover person who no longer had a place in the world. I slept on the couch, woke up before everyone else so as not to disturb, and lived constantly apologizing for existing. Shame and guilt consumed me from within like rust-eating iron. "Mom, you're not to blame for anything," Mary would repeat, holding my trembling hands between hers. "You're the victim here, not the guilty one." Beautiful words, but hard to believe when you're a mother. We always think we could have done more, educated better, noticed the signs earlier. Maybe if I had been more attentive to the friends Junior was hanging out with. Maybe if I had talked more about his grief over his father. Maybe if I had been firmer. They may have haunted me day and night, ghosts that wouldn't let me sleep. Mary was my angel in those dark days. I'll never forget how she took care of me like a mother takes care of a small child. It was she who woke me when I screamed during nightmares. She who dried my tears. She convinced me to seek help. "You need to talk to someone, Mom," she insisted. "Someone professional who knows how to deal with this kind of trauma." I resisted at first. In my generation, family problems were solved at home, not exposed to strangers. Therapy was for rich people, for weak people. At least that's what I thought until the day I tried to take my own life. It was about 3 months after the move. I had gotten a small job at a fabric store near the apartment. Nothing special, just organizing shelves, attending to customers, making packages. But it was important to me. A beginning of independence. A way not to feel like a burden to Mary. That day, I served a young man. Young couldn't have been more than 18. He wanted to buy fabric for his mother, who sewed. He had dark eyes, slightly long hair, a way of speaking that, good heavens, he looked so much like Junior that my heart stopped. For a delirious moment, I thought it was him, that he had found me, that he had come to finish what he started. I ran out of the store without explanation, without warning. I ran through the streets like a madwoman, bumping into people, tripping over my own feet. I arrived home breathless, shaking so much I could barely put the key in the lock. Inside the empty apartment, Mary was at college, her friends at work. I collapsed. I couldn't take it anymore. The pain, The constant fear, the nightmares, the shame, the guilt. It was too heavy to carry. I wanted it to end. That's all. I wanted peace. I went to the bathroom cabinet where I kept the medicines the doctor had prescribed for the rib pains that never completely healed. Strong sedatives, the kind that made me sleep without dreaming. I took the bottle, looking at those small white pills that promised temporary relief. How many would be necessary for permanent relief? 10, 20, the whole bottle. I filled a glass of water, put the first pills in my hand. It was then that I saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The hollow eyes, the thin face, aged 10 years in just a few months. I didn't recognize myself in that destroyed woman without shine, without life. "What are you doing, Louise?" I asked for a reflection. "Are you going to give up now after all you've endured? Are you going to let him win? Let him destroy not only your body, but your soul, too?" Something awakened inside me at that moment. A spark of dignity, of pride, of strength. I thought I had lost forever. I threw the pills in the toilet, flushed, cried until I felt I had completely emptied myself. When Mary arrived, I told her everything about the guy at the store, about the pills, about the moment in the mirror. She cried with me, hugged me tight, then picked up the phone. "I'm going to make an appointment for you tomorrow," she said, determined. "I'm not going to lose my mother, too. I won't." And that's how I met Mrs. Gertrude, a middle-aged psychologist with a face that looked like she had seen everything in this life. At first, I could barely look at her. The shame of telling what had happened, of exposing that wound so intimate, so painful, was almost paralyzing. But gradually, word by word, tear by tear, I began to put out the poison that was corroding me from within. I talked about Frank, about our marriage, about his death. I told about Junior, about how he changed in adolescence, about dangerous friends. And finally, in the 6th session, I managed to tell about that day in the bathroom, about the unthinkable violence, about the horror I experienced at the hands of my own son. Mrs. Gertrude listened to everything without judging, without interrupting, just nodding from time to time, offering me a tissue when the tears came. When I finished, exhausted, empty, she just said, "Mrs. Miller, you are the bravest person I've ever met." At that moment, I didn't believe her. Brave me. A broken, fugitive, traumatized woman who had abandoned her own son. What kind of courage was that? But with time, with the sessions that followed for months, I began to understand what she meant. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. It's falling and getting up even when every little piece of you hurts. It's choosing to live even when death seems the easier path. Slowly, week after week, I rebuilt myself like a broken vase that is carefully glued. The cracks are always visible, but still able to hold water to support flowers to serve its purpose. I never went back to being the same Louise as before. How could I? Some experiences change us forever, but I found a new version of myself. One that carried deep scars, yes, but also a strength I didn't know I had. Time went by. Mary graduated from college, got a good job, and started dating a kind man. We moved to a better apartment where I had my own room instead of the living room couch. Life created a new normality. Different from what I had once dreamed, but still a life. In 2001, Mary got married. A simple, intimate ceremony, just the closest people, watching her walk to the altar. So beautiful in the simple white dress. I thought of everything we had been through, of how she had been my rock when everything crumbled. "Dad would be so proud," she said when I hugged her after the ceremony. And she was right. Frank would have swelled with pride seeing our daughter so strong, so upright, so full of life despite everything. After the wedding, Mary and her husband bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. They insisted that I go live with them, that there was plenty of space, that it made no sense for me to stay alone. I accepted, grateful to have a daughter who, despite all the tragedies, still cared so much for her mother. In the years that followed, I found a peace I didn't think was possible. It wasn't complete happiness. I think that would never be possible again after everything. But it was a kind of quiet acceptance, a way of living in the present without the past constantly suffocating me. I helped around the house, took care of the garden, and did small sewing jobs for the neighbors. It was a quiet, simple life, but dignified. Far from that city where everything happened, far from the memories that lived in every corner, every street, every wall of that house I once called home. From Junior, I had no news. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth after I left home. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about him, imagining what direction his life had taken. But they were thoughts I quickly pushed away for my own sanity. Until in 2010, I received that letter from the penitentiary. 15 years later, a request for forgiveness that came too late, when the wounds had already turned into thick scars, when the pain had already transformed into a constant numbness, and then came the news of his death, stabbed in a prison fight. My son, who had destroyed my life with violence, also died by violence. A terrible cycle closing in a tragic way. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. The ghosts were still too vivid, the trauma too deep. But I sent a white flower, a final gesture for the child he once was, for the son I lost long before that knife in prison. Today, at 73, I look back and see a life divided into two very distinct parts. Before and after that day in the bathroom, like a fracture that even after being mended, never again is exactly the same. I have two beautiful grandchildren now. Anna Louise, 20, as studious as her mother, and Peter, 18. With the smile of the grandfather he never knew. They are my joy, my redemption, the proof that life goes on despite everything, that there is still beauty in the world, even after the worst storm. I never told them about the uncle they never knew, neither the complete version, which would be too heavy to share, nor a softened version. For them, the family story begins with the death of their grandfather in a work accident with their grandmother's move to be closer to her daughter. The rest remain buried, a secret I will take with me when my time comes. Mary knows, of course, and her husband too, because there are things you don't hide from those who share life with you. But to the rest of the world, I am just Mrs. Miller, the nice lady who does sewing work, who takes care of the garden with special care, who always has a cup of tea and advice for those who need it. No one imagines looking at this little old lady with white hair and a gentle smile. The storms I've faced, the monsters I've conquered, the impossible decisions I've had to make. And perhaps that's the most important lesson I've learned in this entire journey. We never know what others carry inside them. The deepest scars are invisible to the eyes. Behind the polite smile of the neighbor, the efficiency of the coworker, the kindness of the lady at the bus stop, there may exist stories of pain and overcoming that we would never imagine. That's why I try to be kind to everyone I meet along the way. Because I know better than many how a small gesture of kindness can mean so much when we're broken inside. Like Mrs. Nelson, who gave me coffee at the bus station that first day. Like Mrs. Gertrude, who helped me glue the pieces of my being, like so many others who without knowing helped me continue when all I wanted was to give up. My story isn't pretty, and isn't inspiring in the traditional sense. It's a story of pain, of betrayal, of wounds that never completely close. But it's also a story of survival, of reconstruction, of finding small joys even after the worst of earthquakes. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this story, my dears, it's this. As long as there is life, there is the possibility of a new beginning. No matter how deep the fall, how dark the night, how devastating the loss, always, always, there is a next dawn. There is always a next step to take, no matter how small. Thank you for listening to this old lady share her story. It's not easy to open such old wounds, but somehow telling all this was like taking a weight off my shoulders, as if by sharing the burden became a little lighter. If you enjoyed my story, even though it was so heavy, please leave your like down below and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It would be a joy to know that my pain served for something, even if it's just to make someone feel less alone in their own battles. And if you watched until here, can you leave in the comments which city you're watching me from? This grandma here is curious to know who are the gentle souls who dedicated their time to listen to my memories. Life isn't always easy, my dear. Sometimes it strikes us with a force we think we won't be able to withstand. But if there's one thing I've learned in my 73 years in this world, it's that we are much stronger than we imagine, and that even in the darkest nights, the stars are still up there, even if temporarily hidden from our sight.